Welcome back, everybody. We're going to talk today with Father Kirby again. Father, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Good to be on the show.
We're going to talk about environmentalism. You know, that is a hot button topic. It's the badge of honor that I can say I don't know much about it, because it's just not been a very interesting topic to me, and in large part because, you know, the science side of it, Father, seems like the jury's out. I mean, people debate always. I don't want to take one big view or another scientifically. I'm much more of a principle-based guy. I'd rather just pay attention to certain principles. But I can tell you what, I mean, if the far left is saying that, you know, because I drive a big truck, I'm destroying the planet, it's a little hard for me to grasp that. But the church nonetheless provides guidance for us on how to think about God's creation. So keeping in mind that this is a charged issue that's very much, you know, seemed to be right down party lines, you know, and it seems like, in my opinion, the environmentalists, the radical ones on the far left, seem to get weirder and weirder about this issue with every passing year. It's definitely on people's minds in terms of the ballot box come November 3rd. So I think we need some guidance on it. So how is a informed Catholic supposed to think about this topic of environmentalism?
Yes. So first of all, I very much appreciate the way that you set up the question, because I think the first thing that as believers we need to realize is we do care about the environment. We are called by God to be good stewards of all his gifts, including the environment. However, unlike the majority of environmental activists who see the world as a good unto itself, we see the world as good because it was created by a good God. And we see that this is a gift from a creator, that this is his creation, that we have been blessed with this. There are times in which it must be subdued. It's proper for us to use the earth in order to provide for ourselves, our loved ones, and our society. Some of the activists go to other extremes because kind of they would say, not only are you irresponsible for driving a large car, but they would say you're irresponsible to the planet for having 14 children. So they would even see humanity as a type of parasite to this good unto itself world. And we have to be very careful as Christians that when we speak this language of stewardship and care for the earth and care for our environment, that we don't find ourselves with bad fellows. Because there are a lot of activists out there who their care for the environment is extreme, it's ungodly, and I'm not really sure exactly what's driving it. A lot of times we see that this environmental movement is merged with other movements, the LGBTQ, and especially this transgenderism, you know, and so on. A gender agenda is oftentimes associated with it, and so on. So,
PETA.
Yeah. Yep.
PETA, you know,
right.
Radical protection of animals. You know, they care so much about monkeys, but don't care about unborn children. I mean, yeah, the crazies come out and all get around Mother Earth. I mean, that's what seems to happen.
Yes, as I saw one picture one time, one poster, it showed a whale with a little sign, and the whale had the sign that said, "Save baby human." You know what I mean? Like, you know, and
that's all. Oh, I need that T-shirt, man. I need to get that. That's awesome.
Because for us, it begins with God as creator. As human beings, we are the crown of his creation. And of course, you know, when we approach the earth with stewardship, yes, of course we believe in the purification of our water. We believe in the reforestation of the land. We are called to subdue, but not to crush or harm the earth. But we do have to subdue it at times in order to provide for humanity. So you can see the difference there. A good God and has crowned his creation with human beings, and creation is given to this human family, as opposed to the earth is a good unto itself and humanity are the parasites that are causing harm to the earth. Very different worldviews and very different policies flow from these different worldviews.
Yeah, you know, it seems like when you remove God from somebody's moral thinking and their conscience, they have to fill it with something. I mean, they come up with these fake religions. I mean, it's a fake morality. And I don't care what you pick, but they have to pick something to fill in the void. And environmentalism does seem to be a big one. But, from a Christian standpoint, it really is kind of a false god. When you start putting something like the earth up as an end in itself, as opposed to something that serves a greater purpose, ultimately leading to, better fulfilling our duties towards God and neighbor. So, it does seem to be almost a false god. But I see that with a lot of extreme views. It's people that have those views. It's because they're not very theistic. They're not very focused on God. And so, it's sort of like Augustine, my heart's restless until it rests in you alone. They have to fill it with something. Yes. So they put baby whales in there, Yes. Now, what about the virtue, Father? In these social doctrine topics and principles, you have certain virtues that you tie to them to kind of help guide a Catholic through the issue. So what virtue do you attach to this?
Yeah, so, and of course, anyone could associate multiple virtues with the topic, but the one that I highlight in terms of environment and stewardship is the virtue of hope. And I focus on that because oftentimes we confuse the virtue of hope, as oftentimes Christians can confuse how we approach the environment. That the virtue of hope is not, I hope my favorite team wins in this sports competition. I hope that I get a parking spot. I hope that, they have my favorite food at this restaurant. In many respects, it's a misuse of the word hope, because ultimately hope is the desire and the knowledge of eternity, right? So hope is that at the end of going through this maze of life with all its twists and turns, that there's an eternal beatitude waiting for me, and that I might be one to share in that eternity, so that it exists, that I can be one to share in it, and so on. That's hope. And what that does is it orders everything else. So obviously we know that the ends do not justify the means, but Aquinas, St. Thomas Aquinas, one of our great thinkers, he said that while the end doesn't justify the means, the end, when known, does order the means.
Orders the means, yeah.
So here, when we have the light of eternity and the understanding that heaven awaits us, it orders everything else in our life in a moral way, a good way.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really good. Now, what about natural law? Okay, so when you think about the environment, when you think about creation, you get this, natural law does come to mind, because God is revealing himself. He doesn't just reveal himself through divine law. He reveals himself through natural law. And I know that often refers to the power of reason. The law is written on our hearts. We have a sense. We have just a very sacred sense about certain things. But, I moved out to 12 acres and my kids are kind of living a very rural life. And when you get your hands dirty in the soil on your own little farm, and you see things growing and you plant seeds and you see it take off and you harvest and you learn what good soil is and bad soil. You learn what, how the world really works. It's extraordinarily edifying and points towards God. I mean, there's a natural law, I think, written into the soil. And so how do you relate natural law to the topic of the environment?
Yeah, so one thing I appreciated about Pope Benedict XVI, when he was the ruling pope, was whenever he spoke about the environment, he always placed his teachings on the environment in this context of the natural law. That, as you described, Connor, like, children or adults, we can see the movement of seasons. We can see how the earth has formed. We can see the teleology, that orientation within all things, that an acorn becomes an oak tree, and so on. We can see this and understand this, and it allows us to see this type of order or pattern in creation that then begins to engage our reason, and then we're able to participate in God's reason. So, and be able to see this moral code written within our own souls, within our own hearts. So obviously there's a whole process that's a process of discernment, of discovery. And I very much appreciate that lesson being a part of our teaching on stewardship towards the environment, because I think that not only do we get a good teaching on stewardship, but we get a really rich teaching on a fundamental foundation of the moral life. And to understand, wow, so all these moral laws and so on. Not only are they external, but they're written within inside me. And if I want peace or tranquility, if I want this type of a common good to be built up between myself and my neighbors, then I should listen to this moral law. And the more I do that, then the more there is this prosperity, moral prosperity. So I pretty much appreciated that context. That's not as emphasized now, but I think that has a very rich seed bed. The natural law has a seed bed in the teaching of environmental stewardship. Another thing I appreciated about Pope Benedict XVI, just to add this to the part of the conversation, is he always avoided crossing the line into science.
Mm-hmm.
So we know right now, is there climate change? Yes, of course. The climate's been changing since God created the earth, of course, right? What aspect of it is man-made? Well, as you said earlier, this is debated among scientists, and this is a scientific question. It's not a theological one. As I recently commented at my parish, I said, this argument is best left among the scientists, because we don't want scientists to become theologians, and it's good for theologians not to become scientists. And when we begin to dabble with science, we sometimes get our hands bit. So we have to be careful. So with that said, I will just address this. Right now, Pope Francis, as the ruling Pope of our church, he has many theological opinions and prudential judgments in terms of the environment. As a trained moral theologian, I don't appreciate that an opinion is voiced, especially in official teaching, because it's very confusing to people.
Yep.
People would ask, the Pope has an opinion on man-made causes of climate change. Am I bound morally to believe that? No. He does not have the authority outside of faith and morals. He can't bind you in the natural sciences. He can offer his theological opinion, his prudential judgment. As I tell my fellow believers, we are called to respect him, to honor his office, but we are free to disagree with his prudential judgments. So when it comes to the man-made causes of climate change, that is not a part of the official teachings of our church. We have a Pope who has an opinion. He's voiced it. He's rallying and mobilizing the resources of the church. He has my respect, his office. He has my support in terms of his office. But I'm not bound, nor is any believer, to accept what he says, because he doesn't have the competency to give that opinion, nor the authority to bind me, because it's outside of faith and morals.
And it seems to me that other popes in recent memory were better at distinguishing when something was an opinion and when something was doctrinal. And it seems that in one's communication style, one's personality, it just seems like that the confusion that comes out of this papacy is largely due to that. What was this a matter of faith and morals, or was this a personal judgment and a personal theological opinion? Sometimes it's really hard to tell.
Yes, and as you mentioned, previous popes were a little clearer.
Yeah.
Either they would not use official channels or official teaching methods to give opinions. So when Pope Benedict wrote his trilogy on the life of Christ, it was distinct. It was published on its own. He begins in the intro by saying, "This is my personal opinion. You're free to disagree with my conclusions or my interpretations of these events in the life of our Lord," and so on. That's academic honesty, that's logical precision. Now, is Pope Francis trying to be, deceptive? I don't think so. I think this is a man who has an opinion, who believes very strongly in it. I think that he was not trained beyond normal training for theologians. He was sent to school in Germany to continue his studies, but was sent back in order to serve as a superior of his province. So he really doesn't have advanced theological training. He doesn't have a doctorate. He was never a teacher of theology or never published in theology. So when you compare Pope Benedict XVI, who I think will probably be a doctor of the church, I mean,
wow.
A real father of the council in terms of its theological patrimony and of the Christian tradition in general. I try to be fair to Pope Francis, because Pope Francis just doesn't have the training or the theological expertise that Pope Benedict did. With that said, however, I do wish sometimes there was a little precision, like, this is my opinion, this is my prudential judgment, and perhaps not to include that in the means of official teachings.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for us American voters, you have Catholics who hear the emphasis on environmentalism from both Pope Francis and then also from the Democratic Party, and that gets confusing in people's heads, and it's difficult. And so I think that kind of thing, intentional or not, leads voters to see the Democratic Party as perhaps embodying more Catholic social teaching, and in my opinion, it couldn't be any more the opposite.
Connor, let's say this, as I want to be honest with the listeners and for them to understand, when you have high churchmen in the Church of the United States, the Catholic Church of the United States, saying that climate change and the environment is more important than fixing the sexual abuse crisis, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this has been said, right? So when we talk about the extremism that marks certain aspects of this, it's there, and it is completely opposed to official church teaching.
I think people struggle in seeing, again, even something that comes out of the United States Council of Catholic Bishops, articles or things that they write versus true doctrinal teachings. How do you know? I mean, maybe this is just too fundamental of a question, but how do you know exactly when something is Catholic teaching? I mean, is the USCCB's documents, are those authoritative? What do you do with that?
Yes, I will say, I tell any person who comes to me and says, Father Kirby, you preach this, but the priest down the road says this, or this bishop or this cardinal says this, and so on. I say, okay. And if I am able, I bring them into my office. I've got a copy of the Catechism of the Catholic Church and the Compendium of Social Doctrine. And either I do it with them or I tell them, because we distribute the Catechism of the Catholic Church every Ash Wednesday at my parish. Every family, every household in my parish has a Catechism of the Catholic Church. Plus it's available online, right? I say, if you hear two opposing views, go to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, right? So that's first and foremost. And then secondly, I'd say, read books from Tan.
Yes, exactly right. That's awesome. That's awesome. That's really good. All right. Well, let's talk about stewardship. At some point you mentioned to me that the seventh commandment, how it relates to the concept of stewardship, even stewardship of the earth, which is a related topic to this environmentalism. And that's a fascinating connection there. So tell us about stewardship, how it relates. Obviously, we are stewards of the earth to some extent. I think that happened in Genesis. But how in the world does this relate to the seventh commandment?
Normally we point to the seventh commandment, not to steal. And of course you can see, especially earlier we were talking about justice, so the connection is what is a person owed? And of course, if someone's owed something and we don't give it to them, then that is a form of stealing. And that could be in an active way, an active commission, but it can also be omission, so we have to be cautious with that.
Stewardship again, though, let's do a little bit more, because I think this is where conservatives can hear a good lesson about, we are stewards of the earth. I'm all for national forest. I'm all for conservation. I'm a hunter. I'm a fisherman. I love the earth. I think that certain things should be protected. I think I think it's very, very important. But it only goes so far. So in terms of stewardship, what else would you have to say about our government's duty? We have personal duties, but then our government's duty for taking care of the environment. So it's one thing to kind of restrict corporations through regulations to prevent pollution, and no one wants pollution. No one wants that. It's just a matter of how much regulations are supposed to be. And then it's another thing to proactively go out and try to, whether you're planting trees or whatever it is, those actions seem good to me because that's taking care of the planet. If I'm driving down the interstate and I see the sign, adopt a highway, and I see people picking trash up, I think who doesn't like that, So but it doesn't mean I have to be an environmentalist, So just talk a little bit more about stewardship in terms of what are the duties that we have, and what duties does the government have towards the world, the earth.
Yeah, so I think that if we go back and if we take the word steward and we put it in its original context in the ancient world, a steward was a trusted servant. He was usually one of the senior servants who worked in the main property in the home of the owner, the owner of the property. And the steward was given particular responsibility to distribute the goods, the resources of the owner, to provide for the care of the resources, the personnel, and so on. So the steward, when we talk about that, there's actually a rich biblical ancient world context for that. So when we talk about stewardship, we want to apply that saying that we very much see that we are favored servants of a gracious king, of a gracious owner, who has entrusted us and named us stewards. So our task is to care for his resources, his talents, his property, and to do it in such a way that it both acknowledges his ownership and also serves his purpose. So I think for ourselves, and as we are a moral voice for governments and for the care of the environment, our task is to say, yes, like we have to subdue the earth, we have to provide for the human family, but to do it in such a way where whatever harm can be avoided, or whatever subduing can be done in moderation of the environment, that should be done. So again, it comes down to being just a moral voice and understanding what steward means, because we use that term a lot. And oftentimes, sadly, we use this a lot in the church when we want money. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Stewardship means tithe.
Right. So here, I think that here it just means to properly, responsibly use the gifts of our owner, of our master, who has entrusted us with his estate.
Well, in terms of TAN, it's a family-owned business, and I'm happy about that. I'm proud of that. But with every passing year, I'm talking more about the sense of stewardship. Because I feel that it's a very short-lived gift from God to our family and our employees. And during our time here at TAN, we have to take care of the wonderful treasures of the traditions of the church and all these titles that we have and this content. And so, the concept of stewardship has really been impacting me. And then even as a father who, I don't think you think about this very much when your kids are all little, but as they get older and the birds start leaving the nest, I got 2 college kids now, and you start realizing, man, I had them in the nest for a very short amount of time. And, you knew intellectually that you didn't own your kids, obviously you don't own your kids, but you sort of think of them as your kids. And as they've gotten older, I've thought of them more as God's kids, and that I had a stewardship time period where I had to form them and train them and take care of them. Stewardship is a concept that you're taking care of something while it's your turn, and that's going to pass to somebody else.
Yes.
So if I have a stewardship towards my daughter, and in a sense, I'll have that as long as I'm alive. But in another sense, if she was to get married, then her husband takes on a certain stewardship towards her in a way that I perhaps will no longer be her primary caregiver anymore. So that's just a little example, but the concept of stewardship is alive and well in my mind and heart and at work because of TAN, but also at home. And I think the older you get and you realize this isn't going to last forever, you're going to have to pass this on to somebody else. Somebody else is going to have to take up the torch and run with it.
Yeah.
That's when you realize, oh, this is stewardship. That's sort of what stewardship means, in a sense to me, that we have duties to take care of it. And while, so all private ownership in a sense is short-lived, and ultimately everything is God's. And we just have to play our small role in it. And I think that's a pretty good perspective towards the environment, towards the earth, that it's God's. It is God's, and we have to help take care of it to a certain extent while we have it. But it's a means to an end, and it's ultimately to help us serve Him better. So Any final thoughts on this topic or advice towards a voter going into the booth? Environmentalism is on every single news network. It's going to be talked about in presidential debates or stump speeches. So your viewers are getting all kinds of stuff into their brains from the two political parties and news stations. So what's your final thought to them to help guide their conscience before they go into the voter booth?
Yes, I would say final word is to take that summary of stewardship and to realize, yes, we do have a care for the earth. We want to be attentive and good stewards, but we're not environmentalists. We're not extremists. We very much see that the world is good because it was made by a good creator. And I think that we keep that focus, that theological focus, as we approach the environment.
All right, Father, thanks again for everything. That was great. Helps give some logic and some reason to a kind of a crazy topic in the world today. So thanks very much. Hope everybody enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.